What up, guys? So today's podcast is going to be a series of Q&A. So you'll have about we're going to get in this, so I don't know how many questions we're going to get, but we're going to have some questions that we've gathered over time that I'll be answering. And so we were going to have a guest, and the guest ended up getting sick. It happens sometimes, especially when you're training hard, and the spring and the weather is changing. Many of you guys can relate. So that said, we'll have some guests coming up soon. Several people that were in like the ADCCs and things like that. So some fun guests in the future. But today, since we're kind of, I guess you'd say we're not scrambling, but it's more of a last minute podcast. We're going to be doing some questions that I've received from you guys from emails and things like that. And this will hopefully be entertaining and fun to you. There's going to be at least a couple of fun stories and mixed in there that you guys should enjoy. So with that said, let's jump into this podcast today. And a big thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD, guys. If you haven't checked them out before, we talk about them every episode. Again, from my standpoint, where CBD sort of finds its space is in the supplement regimen. So again, if you're someone that, if your diet and sleep and your training's not tight yet, do that stuff first. Don't even worry about CBD. But if that stuff's good, then CBD can be a nice thing to add into the mix. It's like one of my training partners, Mark. He's recently been on a diet that Eli and stuff was on, and I remember he said the thing that he noticed about getting on a really good, strict, but clean diet that again it's easy to follow. He said that his wife told him that he doesn't complain about his body anymore. Right. Because again, when you guys get older, and if you're anybody that's north of 35, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And especially if you've trained a long time or worked out like Mark. I mean, he played college ball, and then he got into jiu-jitsu and stuff like that. So he's taking a lot of abuse on his body. You just feel it. Like you have a hard training day, and then the next morning you're like, oh man, I feel stiff and sore, whatever. It takes a little bit to warm up. And one of the things that he noticed, and I noticed the same thing. Some of you guys who have certain like products, like my Swollen Roll product, there's actually an interview where from 2020, when I was going through the diet with Eli for the first time, I was actually talking to him. I was like, man, my hands, because I've got like these knobby like knuckles from grappling, plus a little bit of just heredity right there. But I was talking to him, I was like, man, my body doesn't feel rough. I feel great. And I remember him saying like, yeah, it's because you got rid of all the crap. And you see this from people where they'll go on these really hard, really restrictive diets, like a carnivore diet or vegan diet, or whatever the diet is, right? And then they're like, this is the diet, it's the magic, right? And it's like, well, you can have carbs, you can have these other foods, you just got to get rid of, more than likely probably what's causing your problem with sugar. You know what I mean? It's probably that was the issue, right? But anyway, that said, that's like the biggest. Like if your body's like feeling broken and everything else, I encourage you so much to get on a good diet, a good consistent diet that's both clean. And when I mean clean, I mean that very arbitrarily, basically just, you're eating whole foods that you actually have to cook yourself, not eating stuff out of a package, not eating junk, minus like maybe some supplements and protein and things like that. And then getting good sleep and training properly. By properly, again, I mean that within the realm of why you're training, and within the realm of reasonability for your age and everything else. But that said, at the end of all that, if that stuff's there and you want an extra boost to your recovery, I think that CBD is a great thing to add into the mix. Again, something I like, and I encourage people to try out. It can have a lot of cool benefits. And again, they've got some other cool products out now, like that include a CBN product, which is to help more with sleep.
Again, I think it's like for waking up less, essentially. Like when you sleep,
it's supposed to help you have more of a sound sleep cycle.
Less waking up.
Yeah, which can be helpful. A lot of you guys, like, we're all guilty of this. Like we're all busy. We've got stuff just running through our brains constantly, and pop up in the middle of the night, and you're thinking about it. So if you can maybe have something that it even helps move the needle with your sleep a little bit, that's only going to help your recovery even more. So anyway, with that said, guys, check out Charlotte's Web's website, charlottesweb.com. Promo code is Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order. And by the way, guys, if you ever have any problems with any of the codes, sometimes their website has some funky stuff going on, send us a message on Instagram and we'll help you get it cleared up. But check it out at charlottesweb.com. Also, thanks to my buddy Matt at Epic Roll. Matt in Epic Roll, they're getting ready to, at this time of recording, is getting ready to launch the PGF coming up soon. Excited to see that. Should be very fun. But again, if you guys have never been to his website, check it out at epicrollbjj.com. He has some great gis, rash guards, shorts, t-shirts, anything related to jiu-jitsu that you could possibly want. He more than likely has it. Good prices, good quality, great customer service. And if you guys want to save 20% on the order with whatever you buy, whether it's a gi, rash guard, whatever, then put in Jiu-Jitsu 20 at checkout and you'll get the discount. Also, guys, patreon.com. If you want to support the podcast directly, we do have a Patreon where we'll give you early access to the podcast. You get an ad-free version. We also have a library that gets updated with content all the time. So again, there's tons of stuff in there, everything from specific rolling videos that are never released, videos that I've never made it to YouTube for whatever reason. We have seminars that we've recorded, stretching and flexibility, mobility routines specifically for jiu-jitsu, created by Mr. Dr. Eugene over there. And so guys, if you want to get access to it, go to patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. And you can go there. And then also, guys, if you want to get my daily email that I send out, you can do so by going to my website at chewjitsu.net/join. When you join up, you get access to my daily email. And then afterwards, you'll get access to a couple of free ebooks that I give away. One is on developing a jiu-jitsu game plan, which we'll talk about the importance of that later on in the podcast, because this is something that every good competitor does. And then also too, there's one on focused training tactics, which again is something we're also going to talk about on the podcast. If you have limited training time, you have to be very focused with it to get the most out of it. And so again, they can be very useful to you if you want to check them out. And you can get access to those and my daily email at chewjitsu.net/join. All right. So first question. And this is like more of like, it was a back and forth. I was had with a guy online where I talked about this idea, and I talked this on the podcast the other day, that there is no meta. I think that's a young person thing, right? Like, what's the meta? What's the most effective tactic available to winning and doing something, as if there's some sort of technical silver bullet that'll solve all your woes, right? And again, in my opinion, there isn't. I have my thoughts on that. But anyway, this guy, he sent me a message and he said, "Man, I love your videos. Been watching you for years. This is where it goes. But I think I have to slightly disagree on this with you."
Okay.
He says, "I agree," because I was talking about the fact that you look at all the winners and they're all in good shape, right? He says, "I agree that lean and fit and strong will dominate jiu-jitsu, but I think that's kind of a given in combat sports. And this would be taken for granted in boxing, MMA, wrestling, and judo." He says, "If we're looking at all the trends," and he kind of goes on, he's like, "I would pose the argument that the meta in BJJ, and I think this is true for combat sports also, is niche specialization, however you want to say it, becoming a master of lesser known positions and forcing your opponents to play there where they're unfamiliar and can't rely on the experience they have from other areas of the sport, So, and he goes on to talk about some stuff that John Danaher said, which it kind of just sort of drives this idea home, which I think is funny. John Danaher is like, he's become like anytime someone like wants to sort of back up a claim, they'll try to find a John Danaher quote, which maybe isn't the worst thing.
He's like the jiu-jitsu dictionary.
Yeah, he's an amazing coach, so maybe it's not the worst thing, right? But it almost, I remember I was thinking about this. Do you ever, when I was a young guy, I was involved in church a lot, and we had these bracelets. It was like WWJD.
Yep.
Like, what would Jesus do? And the idea was like, you would always ask yourself, like, what would Jesus do? The activity that you're getting ready to do. And then, so I was like, I feel like we need to make a bracelet. It's WWJDD. What would John Danaher do? But again, maybe not the bad idea. I like John Danaher. I think he's an amazing coach and I like his stuff, but let's jump into this idea. So first off, yes, it is a given that you should be in shape. But again, look at jiu-jitsu as a whole, right? There's so many people that are carrying around a lot of non-lean body mass, and it's not helping them perform. And I've seen this happen so many times with people in jiu-jitsu, because we have this sort of screwed up focus that we think we can sort of ignore the body and just be very technical, right? It's like, but remember what executes techniques? Your bucket of bones does that, right? And so, yeah, maybe it's a given, but it doesn't mean that it's not necessarily a good lesson, because again, it's when you see good competitors, almost all of them are in shape across combat sports. There are exceptions, but they're the exception, not the rule. And so again, I've seen so many competitors who struggle to compete, keep losing. And then all of a sudden they get in really good shape. They drop a weight class or two, and then all of a sudden they go on a tear and they start winning, because they finally got to where they should be physically. And so again, it's an important thing. So take that for what you will. Now, on to the idea of niche specialization. So our friend here said he watched my videos for a long time. And I'm like, well, you must have not watched very many of them, because this is something I've talked about since 2000. Since I started doing my videos in 2016 in earnest on YouTube, I talked about this idea, because this is what every good competitor does. right? And it doesn't have to be like a lesser, I'll talk about this in a second. It doesn't have to be some technique or position that nobody knows about. But you look across combat sports, and boxers get known for a particular punch, judoka get known for a particular throw, wrestlers get known for a very specific takedown or two.
Mm-hmm.
And in jiu-jitsu, very often you'll see that these very high-level grapplers get known for a particular submission position or something, right? It becomes their place. You look at Hodger Gracie, and he would do the X choke on people, some of the best competitors.
Yep.
Now, again, I don't know how experienced you guys are in jiu-jitsu listening to this, but Schuster's telling you right now that the X choke is nothing new, hasn't been new for a long time, right? Everybody,
one of the first chokes you probably learned in the gi.
Every white belt knows the X choke, but he did it to all these other black belts. How could he do that? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. You have guys where I remember in 2022 when we went to the ADCC championships together, one of the main passing positions I saw used was chest to chest passing from half guard, right? That passing position's been around since I was a white belt. We were doing it. Now, the way they did it was different.
Yeah.
Right. And I can tell you that a lot of my techniques that I do utilize positions that have been around forever. Like I literally use double underpassing in many of my tournament wins. Double underpassing is basic. I learned it. It was the first pass I learned, but I use it very differently now. And so to go to this idea of specialization in a very small focused area, that's the whole point, right? Like when I talk about the little jiu-jitsu game plan book I gave away, the whole point of that is to create a very focused game plan that utilizes your best positions and techniques, and you develop it to such a razor sharp point that that's what you're focused on. And then when you compete, again, there is no meta. But what you're trying to do is your style versus someone else's style. That's the competition, right? And your way of winning typically is, can you make the person that you're facing play in the area of your choosing? So let's say if you're a really good half guard player, your job then is to make the person play in half guard. And you find any way that you can get them down into half guard. If your job or if your best position is full guard, okay, well, then you're going to pull the person to full guard. If it's a particular position from passing, then your whole job is to get into that position in passing where you can be successful. And you're in a space where essentially it's as if you have this really nice fleshed out map where, like, again, all the different little side roads and detours, everything. You just know it all. You have the terrain. It's all laid out in front of you. You know exactly where everything is. And then the person who's now in that position with you, they may know the main roads, but they don't have all those little side roads and everything else. They don't know where they don't know all the twists and turns of how things are going to happen, right? Yep. And so they're not able to react as fast. And so again, it's not just specializing in some unknown position, it's specializing in whatever it is that you're best with. And you develop it to such a degree where, one, the positions oftentimes will change because you're using them different. And then you get so tight in these different areas that it's like when you drive home from work or from training or wherever it is that you go, a lot of times you've gone down those roads so many times, you do it almost unknowingly, right? Whereas if someone else had to go down those same roads, they would have to be much more aware and conscious, and they'd have to be a little bit slower, right? So once you go down these paths so many times over and over again in the gym, you're so much faster, you're tighter, you're sharper. You know all the twists and turns. As soon as they do one thing, you're ready for the next thing. And this is how you develop that. And that's something that every good competitor does. And this is why you will see particular competitors do the same stuff over and over and over again. And so that's just something to keep in mind. This is, again, I share this with you guys because, again, I don't feel like I'm telling you anything new, but it's interesting that people will post this stuff as if it's something new or something I haven't said before. But like, this is what we've always talked about. This is your goal in jiu-jitsu. It's not to learn. You learn everything, but understand when it comes to competing, you're probably in a match, you're probably only going to execute cleanly maybe one or two techniques. And in a really tight match against a similarly skilled opponent, you're only going to execute a few techniques. The rest of it is all scrambling, transitions, and positioning battles, right? Where you're just basically fighting grips and trying to get to that one place. Because again, think about it. If you execute a submission, that's one technique. You might spend the whole match trying to get to that one technique, and it's all grip battles. This is something every great competitor does. They focus on a little specialized area where they get really good. And then again, they bring people into that area. So just an idea.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is when you get very good at a technique, it's like you see it or a position or something. You kind of say a technique. For me, for the loop choke, for example, we talked about that a little bit. I see that from all kinds of different setups, positions. Like I can get to it in a lot of different ways, and I use it in different ways. And I set it up ways that kind of people don't notice, and not the traditional way. Like if I grab your collar and start, yanking your collar
Yeah.
back and forth, you're gonna know something's coming. So I'm very like, you do a very high. You were showing you do a very kind of high position, like a collar grip, like almost reaching the tag. You're trying to get as high as you can. I'm like more loose. I'm almost like my knuckle is like.
Well, I'll stay for control, and then if I'm going for the loop choke, we have to loosen up.
Yeah, but sometimes I don't even want people to feel that. I kind of want them to feel like they're in control a little bit and have that grip. And then as they come in, I just kind of guide them where I want them. So it's just like when somebody gets so good, like Roger Gracie, it's just his timing, his efficiency, his knowledge of positioning and where his hands need to be when you're going to move a certain way, right? He already knows you're going to move in this way based on this reaction. I'm already going to have my hand in position and I'm going to be able to set you up. And so I just think it's very cool to watch a technique that we've all seen. Like you'll do techniques, you'll show us technique in the gym or like in class, like we're rolling through this thing and then you're going to hit it on us. That's usually that's the thing you try to do is like you show the drill or the technique of the class that we're working on. And then you make it a point to try to hit on everyone, even when we know it's coming. That's how you're very good at that position or that technique is that even people know it's coming, they still can't stop it.
Well, and I think there's like a parallel to music. So if a musician has played a song or something, a particular chord progression, whatever, endless amounts to the point where they've mastered it down, right? They then, especially in like jazz and things like that, they get into improvisation.
Yeah.
Right. What allows improvisation is like, a certain level of competency in that area with that particular song or whatever it might be, which then allows you to play and tweak it and change it. And so it's the same thing with us, right? Like I've used the quote probably ad nauseum with Charlie Parker, but it's like he said, you master the instrument, you master the music. It could be getting this wrong in whatever order, but you master the instrument, you master the music, and then you forget all that shit and you just play. And so the same thing happens with us is like you spend so much time trying to master a technique or a position, just nail it down. But then what happens is the more you use something in jiu-jitsu, a lot of times that's when it takes on a life of its own because you start to find new ways to use it and change it. Like you're saying, like, you learned a loop choke and then you tweaked it and you're finding different ways to use it. And you find how to make it your own. It's different than mine, but it's your own. The way that I use the double underpass was shown to me, and then I eventually turned it into something different. And so this is what we're doing, right? And this is why so many jiu-jitsu practitioners who have been around for a long time, especially like some of the old dudes, you'll go around them and they'll just have these really subtle changes of grips. Like I've been around guys like, Laborio, right? And he'll like, oh, I'll do this. And he'll show you like a small grip change. And you're just looking at it thinking, why this shit didn't I think of that? Like, really, because it's really effective, right? And so that's the stuff that comes from trying these things out for a long time. And again, that's always been the goal. And so I think that there's like an improvisation to it because again, it's not the technique, but it's how you use it, right? Just like it's not just the music, it's just how you play it, right? That's why like again, we know that there's these great musicians. Well, what makes them a great musician versus because there's people that can obviously they're just a series of notes. Someone else can play those notes, but what makes them so good? Right. Well, it's because of how they play the music, right? It's not just this soulless, like
strumming,
AI strumming or something, right? It's like, no, man, it's like this jazz musician, this blues artist, right? Like there's soul within that. And they're playing it in a certain way that is unique to them. And you play your jiu-jitsu in a very unique way that's unique to you. And again, that takes time, but that's the goal. And that is what takes a essentially known technique, a very basic technique that everybody knows, and it makes it to where it doesn't feel the same. So when you use it in your own unique way on someone, it no longer feels the same. And so they don't have that, because when you think of jiu-jitsu, what we're really going off of most of the time, especially through a good fast-paced roll, we're going off of intuitive feel. We feel something, and that's actually what makes us respond. We're not necessarily, very rarely in a fast-paced roll are we going, oh, he's got his hand there, I should probably defend that with, you're not thinking that, it's too fast. You feel something, you react. And so a lot of times we have these muscle memory sort of reactions developed from the way we feel. Well, when someone starts changing a technique and making it slightly different, it feels slightly different. And a lot of times people don't have those same reactions. They don't fight it the same way because it's a different movement. And so I found this out so many times where, I would use a technique in a different way and people don't have the built-in muscle memory reactions to counter it because it's different. Just like with your loop choke, right? Like I remember the one tournament in North Carolina where you went out and like choked, it was like 3 dudes in a row, dang, 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 choking out the loop choke. Guarantee every single one of those guys had seen a loop choke before, but they probably hadn't felt your loop choke before. It's different.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing, right? We take techniques and we make them new again by changing them and making them our own. And every now and then you will have some new stuff pop out or whatever. It's there. It enjoys a very limited time in the sun, but it happens for a little bit. But most of the stuff that you see in jiu-jitsu, like it's just old stuff that's been repurposed and remixed. I mean, like I said, very little's new. It's almost all the same stuff that's been used over and over and over again. I mean, like the way that the leg lock positions and like they've been around forever. Even I remember learning the saddle position or senkaku before. Didn't know how to use it like that, but we used it. I remember that was like one of my favorite leg lock positions back in the day, backstep off into the senkaku. But we just call it like a leg or like a triangle position, or we just call it like whatever it is. But we didn't know. Then it became a thing. Everybody's played back mount forever, but again, then you start playing a little differently. Or you see guys where they're playing with certain positions like inverting, and like berimbolo was a thing, and berimbolo had been around for a long time. Guys were using it like in the late 90s, early 2000s. They just didn't use it the same way. They didn't develop it as far. And so you see this just constant where these positions are shifting and changing, but a lot of times it's old stuff that's being remixed by these people, and then it makes it new again.
Yeah, I would say the remix, like you put just a different spin on, a little bit of different setup or flavor or whatever it is, and it doesn't look the same at times. Like you don't recognize it the same way. It kind of gets people off the scent a little bit.
So here's a fun one. Here's a fun question from a fella. We changed his name, or I'm going to change his name to Matt.
Okay.
And Matt, basically, he has a precarious situation. He says, I need your help. I need your help, Jiu-Jitsu. I need your help, Obi-Wan. He spent a year training under a particular guy in a small Jiu-Jitsu gym, and he was one of a handful of students that attended on a regular basis. After a while, he felt like he was basically getting stagnant because the gym wasn't growing. So he eventually goes to another gym, and he starts having this massive increase in his game. He's training with a lot of people at the gym. This gym's a big gym. He said he's got like, tons of other students to roll with. He's like, money well spent. Well, he said that he was recently at a competition, did very well, and took some gold medals home. And, he saw the old instructor and stuff like that, saw his old training partner, said, hey, whatever. All right, so his old instructor eventually contacts him. He receives a text message from the old instructor telling him that he saw his matches and was very impressed and would be sending him a blue belt in the mail. Right? Like, okay, you need to be promoted to blue belt. Even though this guy doesn't train with it and he knows it, And so he's like feeling kind of weird about it. And again, the guy's in such a weird space because he's been around for a short time. So he's just like, man, this is really strange. And he's just wondering if I have any like ideas on how to navigate this. So Matt, thanks for the question, brother. So yeah, I mean, first off, your old coach is being a needy ex. You know what I mean? Like it is what it is. You have to move on. And they do too. That said, I do have a fun story about this one, and this can maybe give you something to think about. So back in, I guess it was like 2011 or 12, one of my black belts now at the time was a blue belt. He came from another gym, and he'd been training with me for a bit. And we were at an MMA fight, and his previous coach, who didn't really live in town anymore, came up, was visiting, and was in the ring, and had brought like all these different guys who had once trained with him. And again, there was a lot of guys who had once trained with him that didn't train with him anymore. Brought him into the ring, and he just starts giving people belts. And one of those guys was Rich. He gave him Rich a belt, gave Rich a purple belt. He's like, here you go, whatever. And so after we're done, we go back to our seats to watch the fights, and Rich is just shaking his head. He said, bro, what am I going to do? He's like, I can't wear this. I'm not a purple belt yet, whatever. He's like, this guy's just, he's just giving us a belt. I don't even train with him anymore. How are you going to give me a belt? You don't even know what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis. And so Rich just gave me the belt. He said, hey, just give this back to me when you think I'm ready. And so we did. About a year, it's like a year or something later, we ended up giving a belt. And so, it's really simple. I know you probably know this. Maybe you're just worried about hurting people's feelings. I know sometimes, you can feel like, hey, man, this guy did help me in some way, so I still feel a sense of loyalty, and that's understandable.
Yeah.
You can be obviously, nice to those people and treat them with respect, as you should. But if you've moved on and you train in another gym, then the people that are going to promote you, unless you have something worked out with your coach, is going to be the people in that gym. Now, there are times where I've had guys who train with me who then want to get promoted by their original coach, and that's fine.
Mhm.
And there's people that do the same with me, but that's worked out in advance, and obviously with you, this was not the case. So your coach is being an EX and you just need to move on. And, if they send you a blue belt in the mail, just, throw that sucker over in the side. And then when your coach now promotes you to a blue belt, you'll have a second blue belt to throw into the wash and mix, and you should wash your belt and don't be a dirty asshole. And you'll have an extra belt. It'll be great. So yeah, that's that one, Matt. Hopefully that goes easy for you.
What do you say? Like, do you say anything? Like, would you say, hey, do you need to say something to your former coach?
I mean,
Do you need to like say, hey, I appreciate it? Or I mean, obviously the right thing to do.
I appreciate it, but I'm going to let my coach here promote me.
Yeah.
I mean, you can just draw your boundaries. Maybe that's what it is. I think maybe people, sometimes we live in a society where we don't want to have any boundaries. And it's like, we're almost like we're chastised for drawing boundaries. Like the minute you say like no to certain things, it's like we instantly either feel bad, like we're being mean to someone, or like it's frowned upon in society where you can't have certain boundaries anymore because, well, you're not being nice to people. But it's like, sometimes it's not about being nice. It's just about drawing a line and saying, this is where the line starts. And it just is what it is. Right. You know what I mean? It's not to be mean or anything. It's just like, hey, look, we have to have some structure to things, and otherwise things just turn into chaos. And so like with that, it's like, yeah, like, okay, like there's a boundary. I don't train with you anymore. Like I train with this coach, because obviously then it becomes chaotic for this person, because he's like, well, who's giving me my belt? Why is this coach trying to give me input if I'm training with this guy? You just say, hey man, like, thank you. I appreciate the kind gesture, but I'm training with this coach now. Just like that. And again, just leave it as is. There doesn't have to be any meanness to it. You can be very respectful to it. Just leave it like that. Here's a quick one. Got a guy who's competing, and he's 35 years old, and he's going to these adult divisions, and he's having mixed results, right? And he was just curious, like, hey, older guy, 35 years old. I always do this. Quick disclaimer. 35 is not an old human being by the standards of modern living, right? But when we're talking about athletic endeavors, you're in the twilight, all right? Just accept it. I know sometimes I get like 45, 50, 60-year-olds like, Chewy, 35 is not long. Like, I'm not saying it's old, but when we're talking about sport, 35 is old. Like, 35 is not exactly the spry years that people decide to go jump into the NFL, right? Like, or any sport. So like, Jiu-Jitsu is unique in the fact that we have these old divisions for old guys to compete against each other. It's great, but again, you're still old. If I mean, if you're 30, if you're 35, you're at midlife, possibly, if you're lucky, right? Like you're getting there. So you're at the halfway mark. You're not young, right?
No.
So it is what it is. That said, he he's getting older. He's 35. He's doing these tournaments, and he competed at the adult division. And he's wondering, would you recommend joining Masters instead? And so I recommend Masters divisions for a couple of reasons. If you are in fact a Masters age competitor, again, there's the age effects of age, like recovery, cardio, and all these things. This all plays a role into it, of course. And then Masters matches tend to be a little bit shorter, not always, but depending on the rank. For white belt, probably won't make a difference, but for black belt, it's much shorter. Which can be beneficial. But the big thing, and I think this is the thing that most people don't really think about, because we get set on the recovery and the effects of age and cardio and things like that, and energy levels. Of course, that all plays a role into it. But one of the things that you could think about for the average person, right? Because those are big for me, right? But I train it all the time anyway. But for someone like you, who's again a hobbyist, who's training, several days a week training, right? You're getting after it. But for whatever reason, you're not able to beat these guys, because he even told me, he said that all these guys train more than him. He's competing. Yep. All these adult competitors are training like 5 days a week. He can't train 5 days a week. Think about being 30. Let's rewind a little bit. Any of you that are in your 30s, late 30s, 40s, whatever, rewind back to what it was like when you're 20, 21, 19, 23, whatever it was. Your life probably had a lot less responsibility. Maybe not for all of you, but for many of you, right? You probably didn't have kids, probably didn't have a wife or a husband, probably didn't have a mortgage or a house or a career, right? You didn't have any responsibilities. Maybe you went to school a little bit, maybe you had to do that stuff, but that stuff was pretty easy to manage. Life had a lot less weight to it.
Mm.
You know, you didn't have that pressure on top. You also didn't think about the fact that, man, I'm getting older, got to make sure I get that retirement, you know, growing, whatever. Like, you know, you just think about things differently as you get older, right? And you're also like, even from a standpoint of looking around at life, right? You start to, I feel like as you get older, you start to want to get more involved with how things are around you, because you're like, well, I'm in this thing. When you're younger, you don't care, you're just living. But as you're older, you're no longer living for just yourself. You're living for, you know, your family, your children, your whatever. So all these things are going on as you get older, but when you're younger, it's not there. So your ability to just have a singular focus on training and getting into the gym is so much better. I think about like when I was in my 20s training, bro, like nothing else really mattered to me. Like everything else was secondary. Training was first.
Mhm.
And it could be that way. And training is still very important to me, of course. But like when I was younger, it's like that's the only thing I wanted to do was train. And like when I was early on getting into jiu-jitsu, it's like, I mean, I didn't care about clothes. I didn't care about cars. I didn't care about making a bunch of money. I was like, I just needed to make enough to get by so that I could go train. And that's all that mattered. And so that is a focus that I like. If you were to put me, myself now and versus that person, that's a focus I literally can't compete with. Can't do it because I got other stuff I got to take care of. Can't just live in the gym all day long because I have nothing else to do or because I don't want to do anything else. And so with that, that's you're fighting against that on top of all the ill effects of age. And so I would encourage anybody, if you're a competitor, just do masters. Again, there's nothing bad about doing it. It's just, this is the beautiful thing about jiu-jitsu. We're opening up space for people who are a little bit older that still got that itch. Hey, you can go do masters, you know? And again, if you're like a full-time competitor and you're in your 30s, you may not need to do masters. You can go do adult. I compete in adult division sometimes. It's not a big deal. But if you're like a hobbyist who's training a few times a week or whatever, you want to go compete, you get the itch, do the division that's appropriate for your age. It's there for a reason. And again, it may seem like in your mind, you may not think it makes that big of a difference, but again, do a couple of tournaments at adults, do a couple of tournaments at masters. You'll feel like, oh, there is a difference here. It just is what it is. And again, there's nothing bad about it. And especially the higher you get in rank, like when you start getting into like the masters divisions of black belt, like in brown belt, these guys aren't slouches.
No,
they're friggin' tough. I mean, I think was Mighty Mouse a Masters competitor?
I think he was.
He's a master. Like
he's a brown belt.
He's a brown belt. I mean, he should be a black belt, right? That dude's amazing, right? He's an amazing, like he's one of the best fighters of all time and best fighters of his division, right? Mm-hmm. And that dude's in a Masters division. I mean, that guy's amazing. And so imagine that then that guy gets to black belt and you get someone to black belt, they're there forever. And so a lot of times you look at a Masters division and it's just riddled with these legends that were in the sport at some point, right? Like it's no joke, you know? So again, you're not being a coward. You're not doing something less than to compete in a Masters division. It's there for a reason. And some of those Masters divisions are super, super competitive. But again, I think it's more appropriate if you're a little bit older to do those divisions.
Yeah. And I think you have to look at what's your goal with jiu-jitsu, right? Like are you trying to be a world champion or not? Like if you are, then maybe, but you can also be a world champion in Masters division. Obviously it's not the same as adult, doesn't really mean the same thing, but I think it's still important. And I think you're going against people that are of similar, probably life circumstance, similar skill set, similar age, of course, similar ability level physically. I think at those divisions, even being in great shape is even more important. I mean, because you can really have a similar skill set, but if somebody just doesn't really work out or doesn't really, strength train and stuff, it really is a huge advantage. But I don't know. I think like I competed in Masters and I think it was good. It was enjoyable. And I'm not trying to be a world champion. I'm trying to go out there. I want to keep all my arms and legs intact. I want to, stay healthy. And I feel like it's a better, I don't know, for me being a hobbyist, it's a better suited competition environment because competitions are stressful enough as it is.
Yeah.
Having a little shorter time to go is fine. Having people that are similar, age and kind of ability and like capacity, because you can't, like as a 20-year-old and a 40-year-old, you can't go as hard. You can't red line. Your red line is not as high.
Right. Your red line goes down dramatically.
It's not as
and
high.
You hit it faster.
Exactly.
Like it's just different. There's also a thing I think about too is the atmosphere of say adults versus older guys. When you're a little bit older, more than likely you've proven yourself in some area of your life at some point, right? Like if you think about, like, let's say, well, again, everybody does this, but I'm going to use men because that's obviously what I am, right? Men, when we're coming up in our society, we have this deep inner urge that, in tribal times would have been guided through with rituals and practices. But we have a deep urge to essentially ascend in our society to become a man, right? We're young boys, and then we need to do something to become a man. Now, in previous societies, there would be a very clear laid structure. Here's what you need to do to become a man in our society. Right. And here's the values that we have. And a lot of times these rituals could be very simple and whatever. Maybe you have to go hunt a particular animal. And then sometimes they were really brutal. And sometimes, like, there was some, I forgot the tribe, like guys would die going through it because it was so brutal. Right. But Native Americans had them. Like, you had these processes of, like, you were now ascending to become a man in our society. And here's what that means. And, it was seen very, like, not a good thing to not do that. Right. To not take your part in society to do one. And so, like, in our modern society, right, it's like if you ask someone, what does it mean to be a man? Well, right. Like, and then you look back at the old days, like, be a man, figure it out. Right. Like those kinds of things. Right. Like, you can get down to things and you can have an idea of what it means for that. But again, no matter what, there's a deep inner urge that we have that as we're getting older, we're like, we need to prove ourselves to the society. This is why you see young men where they do just dumb stuff, because they're all trying to prove their strength, their value, their whatever in society. Everything from, they're trying to go out there and just be a killer competitor and win everything, to be at the top of the podium, to, like, look, I'm good at something, to, doing stupid stuff like driving cars and jumping off cliffs and stuff like that to prove again that there's that substance to them. Right.
Yeah.
And so, there's sociological theories where there's, like, that sort of equates for a lot of the behavior. And I think it makes sense. That said, so when you get to an adult or a master's division, guy's been there, done that. You're in your 30s, you're in your 40s. We're like, hey, look, I'm here because I want to compete and I want to test myself. I've already proven myself. You get, like, military vets who are like, look, I've proven myself in battle. I don't need to. Or you get guys that, like, hey, I've got a career and I have a family and I'm a father. There's a lot of things that already uphold their identity, because you think about that a lot of times when we're young. Part of that is we're essentially searching for a crutch for our identity to hold up on, because we're like, who are we? And you want to feel like you're worth something, and we're all so fucking insecure, right? And so you find this thing that you're good at, that you're competent at, which is good to have, and then you lean against it. It's like, I'm good at something. See, look at me. I've got a nice car, or I've got a career, or I've got this, that, whatever. You lean against that crutch, and then you get another one, and then you can stand up and whatever. But when you're older, you've already got plenty of those crutches to lean on. So this jiu-jitsu thing just becomes a fun thing that you can get into, opposed to you having to, like, base your identity and your self-worth on this thing that you're doing. And so, which is dangerous, but nonetheless, we do it. And so I think that creates an interesting atmosphere where you get these very aggressive matches where guys are going for the win. They don't care if they lose. And if you do win or you do lose afterwards, the camaraderie afterwards is a lot of fun. It's something that, you feel in the adult divisions for sure. But it's something I've always experienced in jiu-jitsu, like, no matter what, but it's something where at the masters divisions, I think it's even intensified a little bit, where there's that level of camaraderie, because people are they already have a very clear identity as to who they are. And so now they're just, like, kind of screwing around and having fun with it.
It's also a good way to test yourself too, because you still want to, I think doing jiu-jitsu, it's fun, it's enjoyable, obviously the camaraderie, the community and stuff, but it's also good to see where you stand.
Yeah.
It's a good way to kind of see where you stand against. I want to see where I stand, not against a 20-year-old black belt adult. I want to see where I stand against a 40-year-old
like-minded
black
guy,
belt, 180-pound, whatever, somebody that's similar to me. Where do I stand in someone the same situation as me? If we get to train, about the same amount of time, about the same size. What is it? And for me, it's good because it gives me an opportunity to kind of test myself and also see where I stand, which I think is very useful.
So here's his question. He actually did leave his name. His name is Matt. He says, I have a question that I think would be good because people encounter it often. And he's, like, wondering what the etiquette for rolling with a disabled grappler. And, basically sent me a video of some guys that had cerebral palsy competing against each other. I haven't seen it. One was much less disabled than the other, and, beat him easily with an armbar. And he said that he's heard the proper etiquette is to let them win. Do you agree with this? Will you handle it? What do you think when rolling with someone who has autism, but they love cranking submissions and are a total monster on the mat? And what about the outliers out there, like an Anthony Robles, who won the NCAA championships with one leg? So the disabled grappler thing. So check this out. In a tournament situation, so if there's a severe like problem where the person is like severely disabled, typically they do like an exhibition, you know, where they'll kind of like, hey, let's give this person a little something to let them move around, and it'll be an exhibition. Because obviously if you're in the middle of a tournament and this guy signed up for this competition in your tournament, you don't want to go home packing out of, you know, because you have good feelings, right? I mean, that's not fair to you, and it's not even fair to that person, because now they're signed up for a tournament and you're treating them differently, right? If it's an exhibition match, it's a little different. Also, too, you have to consider that some of these people that have like a disability of some sort, a person with a disability does not mean they're disabled. There's some tough ass people with disabilities, like you said, Anthony Robles, and you have these examples. I've got like a guy in my gym who's legally blind, right?
Yeah.
Dude's a monster. He's super tough.
He's
a very, you know, very, very tough grappler, very fun to roll with. He's someone that people routinely, all the black belts, comment on being very good and very making a lot of progress. And so again, you don't know. And I've gone with disabled guys in high school wrestling. I remember going with like a blind guy. The blind guy was a freaking savage, tough. He was like a tough match. And then also too, I've gone with guys who were actually, you know, they were disabled to the point where they did not have a chance of beating me, and I could feel it. And I remember locking up with the guy. This was in jiu-jitsu, locked up with him. And initially I'm like going for the kill. And then I feel, oh, you can just feel it sometimes, right? You lock up with someone and you just know they don't have that rigidness that you're going to have to, that's going to stop you. Right. I don't know. Do you know, does that make sense to you? Have you ever locked up with someone and just realized that, okay, this person just doesn't have it?
I think so. Like you feel like I don't know how to describe it. Like it is like there's a feedback.
There's a feedback. Right.
Right. It's like
You're
know,
missing that
if
feedback.
I push you, or I'm going to feel a certain reaction, and you may not feel the reaction you expect.
Or I feel like I have so much control over your balance and everything else. Right. I can just that intuitive feeling of like, you don't have it for me. I felt that. And so I basically turned it down for about 2-3 minutes. I just started rolling around a little bit, playing around, you know, just playing around a little bit, letting them move, and then eventually put the submission on and then cut the match and, you know, ended the match. Now, if it was like an exhibition or something and we were doing something kind of for fun, or I had no problem letting people win. But if it's a competition tournament, like I want to try to win this gold medal.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if this person signed up for this tournament, you're signing up for a tournament. It's not an exhibition match, and you're going to be subjected to the stuff that we'll do with anybody else. But again, if you do feel that it's a little bit, they're not all quite there, or they just don't have it, then you can always go easier and do it. This is like Brandon, you know, Reed, one of my guys that he just competed at the trials. His first match at the trials was against a guy who was blind. And you know, they bring him out to the mat, and you know, the guy is not anywhere physically imposing to when you compare him to Brandon, right? And so you could just kind of get the idea, like Brandon's probably going to have his way if he wants it, right? And so the ref comes up and asks Brandon, hey, will you make contact with him, you know, during the match, because he can't see, right? Which of course Brandon has no problem with, because, you know, we both wrestle blind guys, and in high school wrestling you have to maintain contact.
The rules.
Yeah, you can't just run around them where they can't see you and then shoot in on them. That'd be dangerous. And so Brandon was like, of course, yes. And then he gets in there and he locks up with him, and he snaps him right down into a front headlock, runs around his back. And I remember he was like, afterwards, he knew what he was doing. He's like, all right, like, let me put this choke in. He was nice about it. Afterwards, he felt terrible because it didn't feel good, right? Like, you don't feel great, like winning in that way. You want to go in there and go against someone that like is going to like stand up to you and go at it. But again, the guy signed up for the tournament, so you treat him like an equal. And so I guess that's really what it comes down to, right? Use your best judgment. If you see some guy out there that's just killing it, like I remember one of the most scary wrestlers that I remember in high school was a one-legged wrestler. He was a one-legged wrestler, and he was in like the 160 something weight class, but he had the upper body of a, you know, 180 pounder.
Yeah.
He was missing a leg. that guy was scary. He was basically, you couldn't shoot on him because he was always so low to the ground, and his upper body was so physically dominating compared to his other opponent. He was scary, and nobody liked going against that guy. It wasn't like, oh man, I got an easy draw because I got the guy with one leg. They were like, shit, I got the guy with one leg. Damn it, you know. And so again, use your best judgment, because you will go in there and you'll see people that have some sort of disability, but they're absolute animals and they're ferocious and they're going to come at you. It's like Mike Tyson, they're ferocious. But you know, they're gonna come at you. And then and then occasionally you will have people that will sign up for a tournament where you're going to realize very quickly they just don't have it. And, you know, for whatever reason they sign up for the tournament, you know, treat them as an equal, but maybe you back off a little bit so that you're not just going out there and ragdolling them, you know, and being excessively rough that in a way that you don't need to be, you know, basically tempering your exertion on them, and then just, you know, getting your win, especially if it's a tournament or something like that.
Yeah, I think environment plays a huge role. You know, if it's in the gym, obviously you're gonna have different.
Oh yeah,
gym's different versus
a
tournament, different. Like a competition, right? Like if you're like at the ADCC, like man, I paid a lot of money, spent a lot of time, spent a lot of hours, and you know, training for this thing. And you know, obviously you don't want to hurt anybody. However, it's a tournament. And you have to understand that those are very real risks. You sign the waiver.
Anybody that signed up for the tournament, you engaged in.
But again, you don't have to try to hurt. Some people go out there and try to hurt people, regardless of ability, whatever. But some people are like, look, I've got control of this thing. I'm just gonna, you know, make it more of a, I don't know, like just keep everybody safe. Make it somewhat of a, I don't know.
You don't even have to make it competitive. You can just you can just do what you got to do. It's like, I think the thing is like with what we're doing with martial arts, there's always when you start to develop this ability with martial arts, we should, doesn't mean we always do a great job of it, because we're human, we're flawed, but like you do this job of like, you do what you need to do and nothing more. Right. So like when you're trying to beat someone, like I said, you don't have to go out there and hurt them. Right. So if I get you in a submission, I'm going to catch you in the submission, and I don't have to rip your heel off and try to pop it.
Sure.
I'll try to get the submission, and hopefully you tap out and I can let go before you're injured.
Yeah.
I put you in a submission and I let go when you tap. I do, you know, what I have to do, and I stop. I back off. And I basically, I'm in control of what I'm doing. It's like in MMA fighting. I remember fighting where, you know, you're given a license, you know, literally a fighting license, of a license to go into the ring and do something that would land you in jail outside of the cage, right? It's the stuff that I'm going to do to you in the cage. This would get me in jail, but in here I get to do it. It's a really wild thing, because it's like, crazy. Where else in society do you literally get to sit and just batter someone's face in and hear people cheering? If this was outside the ring, they would tell us, hey, stop, what are you doing? And you're going to go to jail. So you're in there fighting each other and you're just battering the, you know, person. I remember I've had like fights where I'm hammer fisting the guy and I'm watching blood come out of his face. And then, you know, the ref says stop, and done.
Yeah.
I'm in control. Like I let go. There's no more.
Yeah.
I'm not, there's no animosity to this person. I don't want to hurt them anymore. I didn't really want to hurt them in the first place, but it's just what we agreed to do. And because you want to test yourself as a warrior. And so, but when you're done, you're done. And so I think that's really what it comes down to, right? Because it's like, okay, if I go with this person that's a little disabled, like I said, like I had a guy who obviously was not going to win this tournament and didn't belong in the tournament, but he signed up, so whatever. And I'm going to win, but at the same time, I can temper that a little bit, and I can be reasonable with the amount of force I use. I don't have to go excessive on it. I don't have to pick him up and dump him on his neck and try to make a highlight reel with him. I can do what I need to do, just like Brandon did at the ADC trial. Get in, do what you got to do, and then be done with it. And do just like basically the minimum necessary.
Yeah, I think it's about respect. A lot of it too with martial arts. Like that's kind of what we teach you: respect each other and your opponents and stuff. An example: we had those LFA fights. A couple weeks ago. We had a couple guys from our gym fighting, and Ben, who's our MMA coach. Shout out to Ben Fowler, who is a great TKO. And Ben was like on top of the guy. And like, there's a ref that was just terrible. He was letting people get punched way more time. And Ben's like looking at the ref. He's like, dude, how many more times do I have to hit this guy? Like he's literally looking up at the ref while he's throwing, and didn't want to hurt the guy because it was obviously the fight was over. The guy wasn't going anywhere. And so like, it's just that level of respect. Like I want to, you know, do the job like with the least amount of, you know, injury or, you know, hurting my opponent. And I mean, that's it. That's you want to be the most efficient you can be.
Yeah. Well, and it's
to win.
And you know, if you're a fighter, right? You've been around for a while. You're not like a sadist or something, right? Like you don't want to hurt people just because you want to hurt people. You're there to test yourself as a warrior, but like you don't want to actually do such long-term physical damage to that person that like something bad happens, right? So like as a fighter, you know, you're there, you're hitting the person, and you know what it's like to get hit. You know, you may know what it's like to be finished. You may know what it's like to see your head bounce off the side of the cage because you're basically essentially unconscious at that point and you're unable to defend yourself. You don't want to do that to someone.
Sure.
That's when I see like young grapplers where they go out and they intentionally try to rip submissions really hard. It's like either you're really young and you haven't had injuries and you don't know what that's like, and so you have no empathy towards someone, or you're a sociopath. Because how do you do that? Because as a human, how do you do that to another human and not feel anything about it? You know, whereas like most grapplers, you watch all of them, like it's like we do what we got to do sometimes, right? You go in and you catch it and you're like, you're hoping, like, please don't make me have to crank this anymore. And you look at it sometimes where you'll have a really good leg locker where all of a sudden you'll hear pop, 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 and they'll be in the middle of the tournament and they'll let go and they're like, oh snaps, dude, are you okay? And then the guy wants to continue sometimes. And they're like, what are you doing, bro? Because it's like, it didn't have to go that far. And now you're hurt. You're not going to beat me. So again, you know, you go in there and you do what you got to do. But again, I think at some point there's this it's an unwritten rule. It's an unacknowledged sometimes desire to go out there and just basically, like, if you need to give, you know, let's give it a number, 5 sort of like points of physical like damage or energy or whatever, you want to do like 5.1.
Yep.
And then be done. And you know, you can say maybe it's efficiency, but I think it's about just like, again, you're trying to go out there and submit your opponent without hurting them. You're trying to go out there and beat a fighter without like really doing serious damage to him long term. You know, you may end up in a fight doing it, but you don't want to.
Yeah.
You want to have the cleanest match you can. And so I think that's why, like, if you do go in there with anybody, like, you do what you got to do. But if you do have someone that has like a severe like difference in level of ability, you know, I've done this even with I've done open, like there's some tournaments that'll do these big open divisions where it'll be literally not even just an open weight, but open skill. And it's like,
that's a bad idea.
I mean, it could be, you know, it could be. Most people tend to play down a little bit, but it's like at the egos, they'll do an open absolute. And so I've done those several times where, you know, go in there, and I remember, you know, one of the times where I'd go is because he'd have like the big wrestler, I'd be throwing everybody around. So people were like, go beat the wrestler. All right, I'll go jump in. And, you know, when I remember going in there a couple times, the last time I did it was in 2017. And I remember being in the division, I'm rolling with these like blue belts and purple belts the first couple rounds. And like, I remember the blue belt, he's like rolling with me, and I could tell he's like kind of starstruck because he's looking at me, and he's, you know, he kind of mentioned he watched my videos. So we start rolling, and, you know, I take it easy. I back off the pedal because I can, within the first 5 seconds. This isn't, by the way, this isn't always true because there's some killer blue belts out there.
Yes.
But within a few seconds, I could tell like he's not going to be able to beat me. I can just feel it. Been around long enough, 20 plus years. You intuitively know these things. And I back off the gas pedal. We roll around for a few minutes and, you know, have some fun. And then I put him in a submission. And I remember afterwards, he said, thanks for not killing me, man. You know, because again, you know, what am I going to do? Dump this poor blue belt on his neck and, you know, make a highlight reel out of it? There's no honor in that. Yeah. You know, because again, you're now fighting an opponent who doesn't have the ability to withstand what you're going to do. Whereas if you execute a really beautiful technique on a very similarly skilled opponent, that's something, because that person had the ability to fight you at where you were. And that's a different situation. Yep. Guys, and the last one is going to be how to improve in jiu-jitsu with an unpredictable and sometimes limited training schedule. So this one's coming from a chef. He trains in Oslo. His name is Michael. And basically he says that, you know, he can get to the gym sometimes very regularly. Sometimes he can't. Sometimes it's like once a week. Maybe it's just an open mat. Sometimes he's training multiple times a week. Sometimes he's training and he's having to train with different coaches who teach in different styles. And so he just finds that there's not a lot of continuity to his training. And so he's wondering how to make some progress, even with this limited and sometimes, you know, sporadic training schedule. So I'll give you a couple things to chew on, and this is pretty simple stuff. I've talked about this on the channel before, on the YouTube channel, even on the podcast before. I think the key to getting better at jiu-jitsu, regardless of your training schedule, is focus. Now, the way that you get the most out of that short time that you have is going to start with focus. And it's really important if you have a limited training schedule. But even if you have tons of time to train, the more focused you are, the better. But here's the first thing I would say is number one is you want to have something specific to focus on in your game to work on anytime you roll. To do this, think about a specific area you're either struggling with or even somewhere you're having success with, or even something you just have some enthusiasm that you want to learn. And then during your rolling, during those open mat sessions, you should be trying to get to this position, use this technique or whatever it is as much as possible. You got to get focused. Going to that idea of having a niche game plan. I mean, again, you want to learn a lot of stuff so that you can see what's going to be your stuff. And it's good to have a wide knowledge of jiu-jitsu. But when it comes to what you're going to be best with, it's going to be very specific. And because you don't have a lot of extra time to just branch off, you're probably just going to have a much more narrowly focused game anyway, because you don't have time to learn everything, right? So it is what it is. So you get very specific. Now, that said, when you're not in the gym, set aside a little time to either study up on that particular area or that technique with instructionals, with watching matches, whatever it might be. But it's basically studying in those areas that you're trying to focus on when you go to the gym. This will keep you mentally engaged with it, which has a value when it comes to actually sort of understanding techniques and having a better IQ when you hit the mat, but even helping to support the basically the motor patterns, movement patterns you're learning in the gym. Mm. And then the other thing is that whenever you decide to work something new, try to focus on positions or techniques that connect to stuff you're already familiar with. So instead of like branching off and going into these places you've never touched on, you've never learned or anything like that, if your gym's doing that, that's fine. But if it's something you're trying to focus on, think of it this way. Every position has some sort of foundational element to it that has to be developed. And that's typically like muscles, like muscle memory and movement and feel, right? Though, like when you think about, like, for instance, my butterfly guard, I can sit in butterfly guard and I fight for grips automatically. I have such a strong foundation because I've done it so much. Took a while to develop that. That now allows me to add anything into butterfly guard rapidly, right? Yep. Back mount, same thing. I can hold back mount for days, and I'm good at the position. And so adding in different attacks for back mount, I can do it rapidly. If you were to say inverted guard, I play very little inverted guard. I don't have the foundations. I don't feel comfortable there. If you told me that I was going to have to add a technique to inverted guard, I'm going to struggle. It's not my position. So what you do is you want to focus on, and again, you're still within your first couple of years of training, so this is tough, don't get me wrong, but you're still going to have positions that you tend to favor or feel more comfortable with. You're familiar with them. And so when you focus on techniques either in that area or some technique that's kind of similar or branches off from there, you're borrowing that muscle memory that you've already developed, that foundation that you have there, and then you're starting there. It's like trying to build on top of like a plot of land that doesn't have a foundation, right? It's like if you have a foundation built from the position, it's imagine like a house. Okay, well, we've got this big plot of concrete there. We can now build on top of this and put whatever we want to on it. But if we now said, well, I want the house to be over there, but we don't have a foundation built, it's going to be pretty shaky. You're going to have to put the foundational work in first before you can really get the thing going. And that takes a long time. So because you're limited on time, what you do is you basically focus on these foundational places that you're already working from. And then as you branch off into similar positions or positions that connect directly to it, it's literally just, instead of creating a whole new space, you're just basically extending on what you already have, and it'll make a better use of the time. And so that's the idea. Now, that said, number 4 would simply be just stay focused for months at a time. I know this doesn't sound fun. It doesn't sound sexy, but this is the magic. Like, get really focused for months at a time. You don't need to be bouncing around all the time and learning something new every single week. You're probably going to, because you're very new in jiu-jitsu. But when you're trying to develop a particular position or technique, being focused for a long time, there's magic to that.
Yeah.
I look at it's interesting how our societies change with social media and with the internet. Everything's so fast, right? But when you look at, say, previous periods of time where there was less speed, was less a part of it. People went through these different natural working rhythms, and you'd have some mathematician who literally was sitting on a question about a problem for years or months or whatever. And that was engrossing their whole thought process for months. You know what I mean? Or if you think about studying a particular subject in school or something, maybe you stick on a particular thing for a long time or whatever it is, right? Focus on that thing for a while. You don't have to move on. You know, this idea in jiu-jitsu, it's kind of like, it's honestly, it reminds me of almost like marketing sometimes with like cars and stuff. Like, you know, they'll say, hey man, get this new car and everything's gonna be great. Get this new thing and everything's gonna be great. Someone's like, hey, you need to learn this new technique and everything's going to be great. Well, it might, if the technique's good for you, if it's a good position for you, that could definitely be true. But in a lot of cases, you know, if you're already working on something and it's giving you a little bit of success, keep going down that rabbit hole for a while. Stick there for a while. Really flesh out that position. Learn everything you can about that sucker before you decide to say, I need something new. And a lot of times it's not that you need a whole bunch of new stuff. You just need to get better with what you have, especially if you're on limited time and don't have the time to just live on the mat room and work on new stuff all the time.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said. The only thing I'll add is, and this is very hard for everyone, but I think that you have to kind of not worry about winning in the gym when you're working on a new technique or something that you're trying to build off of. Maybe everybody knows that you play a certain style of game and they're just shutting you down, but you're working on a different element, like building off of that, maybe butterfly or whatever it is. You have to kind of stick with it. Like you said, be consistent, and you know, you might lose a little bit. You might get beat up a little bit, and then you'll find success. You know, if you're a white belt, maybe you'll find more success with white belts, and then you'll start to be able to implement that. Because that's a tricky thing too, because we've had, you know, blue belts that were maybe very good at certain things, like Patrick, who's a brown belt now. Yeah, he's a brown belt, but he was really good at leg locks. Started getting really good at leg locks when he was like a bluish kind of purple. He started getting really good, so he was able to implement that style of the specific thing that he implemented. He was able to use it against higher belts, and he kind of stuck with that for a while. I'm sure it didn't work out initially very well. So I think you have to kind of be, like you said, consistent, be a little stubborn, keep working at it, and don't worry about winning so much as like little victories of like entering into the position or being able to kind of get some of the grips you want.
Yeah, because practice doesn't count.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Again, we all want to do better, and so of course, you know, you're going to be competitive, and being competitive is fine, but you can't let the competitiveness to win all the time ruin your ability to expand your game and even have fun with what you're doing.
Yeah, I just think you have to be confident in what you're doing, and don't let, you know, wins and losses on the mats, like as far as in practice, kind of dictate how you feel about your jiu-jitsu.
Yeah, and you will, by the way, like you're going to.
It's good to win. Yeah,
well, it's good. Well, it's fine to win. What I mean is it's a battle for everyone, because you are going to. You know, we're saying this, but Eugene and I struggle with the same 100%.
Stuff. Still struggle with it.
Yeah, because if you get beat on the mat, basically it's a reminder to ourselves, right? Because again, like I have to catch myself sometimes where I'm like, oh, wait a second, I just got like cut. Good job. You know, like whatever. It doesn't make me any less of anything if I get beaten by this person. So again, not all the time, but everybody gets there sometimes where you feel like, man, I suck today because I had a bad performance. Who cares? So what? It's fine. It's practice. Yep. And so again, it's mainly just about catching it, so that if it happens, you have to remind yourself that it's okay, especially if you're working on something new, like Eugene's saying. You have to give yourself almost permission, even going into it, saying, I know I'm going to get beat today because I'm working on something new. And you have to just be ready for it when it pops up, because it's going to pop up. You're going to start questioning yourself. Am I getting worse? Man, I suck today, whatever. Be okay with that.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for being here on the podcast with us today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the sort of short rapid fire Q&A question and answer session that we did with you. Also, thanks to our recent review. So I think last week we started doing this where we were going through our reviews. As you guys drop reviews in on whatever program you listen to the podcast with, we're going through and we're reading them just to show as a thank you. We got, I like it. Let's look at his name. Hopper sucks the life out of me.
I love some of these names. Some of these names are fantastic.
I wonder if is that like a username?
You can make, like, I think you can make it up.
Okay. Hopper sucks the life. Is that like a reference to like Stranger Things or something?
I have no idea.
Anyway, well, Hopper sucks the life out of me. Thank you. He says, it's the little things was his headline. He says, quote, I'm a pet. I don't know what that means. White belt.
I'm not sure.
My first competition is this summer. So I'm so glad I found this podcast to help me train and develop consistency in thinking through this art. I definitely have natural athletics, but I want to learn techniques for my takedown. I've learned a lot about being patient and hope to learn more. So Pet White Belt Hopper. Thank you. Thank you for being here with us, and appreciate you for the review. And again, if you guys give us a review, we'll be happy to read you guys out here on the podcast. But again, feel free to leave us a review. It does help the podcast. It helps it grow because it basically puts us in the algorithmic overlords put us in front of people who search up stuff. So whether you want to support the podcast by checking out our sponsors and Patreon stuff or not, this can be a zero cost way to support the podcast, and it takes literally like 30 seconds. So anyway, that said, thanks to our sponsors for helping make the podcast happen. Charlotte's Web CBD. Again, Charlotte's Web CBD is a great product. If you haven't tried it before, if you've ever wanted to try CBD to see what it's about, that's the company that I like. They're one of the first companies that were out there selling it and sharing it. They're also one of the few companies that third-party tests all of their supplements to make sure that what they say is in the bottle, what's on that label is actually what's in there, which can be really important depending on whether or not you get tested for stuff. And again, they've got all kinds of new products coming out, one of which is a CBN product, which is supposed to help support sleep, in particular supporting you and your ability to stay asleep for the night. So we'll be trying that product out soon. I'll let you know how it goes. But again, you can go to their website at charlottesweb.com. You can take a look through any of the products they have. If you find something that you're interested in, whether it's the tincture, the gummies, whatever it might be, the balms, use the promo code Chewjitsu30 for 30% off the order at checkout. And if you're looking to get any new jiu-jitsu gear, whether it be a rash guard, shorts, gis, some cool t-shirts, whatever it might be, check out my buddy Matt at Epic Roll. This is his website, epicrollbjj.com. Matt is a black belt that's been making jiu-jitsu gear for jiu-jitsu practitioners for a while now. And he's also, again, he's a guy that gets out and competes and he puts it out there. He rolls. He's one of us, right? Which again, I think is important because there's a lot of people that sometimes, get into the jiu-jitsu space to like, there's always this stuff where people, some person's sitting in some place online trying to do a drop shipping business or something, and they're not involved with our community at all. There's a couple companies like that, and that I don't care for, but he's again one of us. He's actually a jiu-jitsu guy that he's sponsoring a lot of up and coming athletes, helping them out, and he's out there doing the thing himself. And so I like supporting him, and he makes good stuff. I really like his rash guards and shorts. I wear his rash guard and shorts that he made for my jiu-jitsu and for the gym stuff pretty much every day. But everything that he makes is great. Great customer service too. If you guys want to check him out, go to epicrollbjj.com. The promo code is Chewjitsu20 for 20% off the order at checkout. And guys, if you want to support the podcast, you can also go to our Patreon, patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast. Again, you support the podcast with a very inexpensive membership fee each month, right? Which you can cancel at any time. And then with that, you get an ad-free version of the podcast, you get early access. You'll also get a library of content we've been creating, which has everything from recorded seminars that I've done that go into different techniques that I use in competition. Also, Eugene has a warm-up routine and stretching routine, sort of mobility routine that's specifically for jiu-jitsu practitioners to help with those tight spots like shoulders, hips, and everything else that we have, all the stuff that gets jacked up, right? So you get access to that and more. There's a lot of stuff, and there's literally hundreds of pieces of content in there that you could dig through and enjoy. But you get access to it by going to the website at patreon.com/the Jiu-Jitsu podcast, and you get access when you join up. And if you guys want to get my daily email, if you like the podcast, if you like my YouTube videos, then you'll like my daily email. You can get it by going to my website at chujitsu.net/join, Join. When you join up, you'll then get my daily email that comes out usually Monday through Friday, sometimes on the weekends. That'll go through everything from book recommendations of stuff I'm reading to training stories and just random ideas that I'm chewing on related to jiu-jitsu, sometimes not. And then with joining up, you'll also get a couple free ebooks that I give away. And again, you'll get access to those for joining up 100% free. So guys, with that said, thank you for being here with us this week. We'll have some guests coming up to you soon. We're excited to talk with them and to have you guys hear about their stories and their training and everything else. And until then, we'll talk to you next time.